Right. We need a slogan for this thing, Carm said, laying down the marketing shots for Vining Engineering and Salvage Team's latest product, the Great Turtle. It's gotta be something catchy, short, and sexy, but gets the point across. Dugan picked up the hollow shots of the Great Turtle and shook his head. And what is the point of this thing exactly? I saw the latest fight. It didn't exactly make things exciting. It just sat there and took it. Carm sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Oh, yeah, I know, but this is what we got. Dugan sat back in his chair. Why not? Slow and steady wins the race. You're kidding me, right? A nursery rhyme to try and hook Earthworks or Johnson Industries? Fine then, Dugan shrugged. Why don't you take a shot at it? Carm had a tendency to think out loud. It was his process, one that often resulted in some terrible phrases that should never be uttered in an office setting, or really ever. Shits out algae. Yeah. Carm, we talked about this, Dugan explained, hands clasped, almost as if in prayer to a higher power. You can't bring up excrement or sexual fluids in a marketing pitch. Right, okay then. Carm took a step back like he just swung at his first strike. How about the Great Turtle? It'll take a beating like your second wife. Misogyny is also prohibited in Vest marketing materials. Carm took another step back for strike 2, then a step forward for his third and final pitch. All right, let's go back to what this thing can do. It's slow. It's not very powerful, but it can take a beating like... Dugan raised a finger. Careful. Like nobody's business. Carm self-corrected. Hardened armor has to be the sell somehow. It's just not a very sexy thing to discuss. I'll give you that, Dugan conceded. The way we look at things, mechs are almost like hot rods. The best ones are fast, sleek, and deadly. If you can't crash at velocities that'll turn you inside out, nobody wants to buy it. Same problem with the Great Turtle. Not only is it not fast enough, but everything about it is designed to keep the pilot safe. There's no sexiness in safety. I know, and with other assault mechs, you could at least point at all the fancy guns. Carm threw up his hands in frustration. It's got some fancy new lasers, but let's not kid ourselves. Nobody's going to look at the Great Turtle and a king crab and think they're in the same league. Can it even kill a king crab? In simulations, it's a little better than average because you can't get a lucky hit on the cockpit. Carm pointed to the apparent head of the Great Turtle. That's actually fake. The cockpit is further inside, safe and sound. What happens is the turtle consistently picks away while the king crab fires everything it has. One eventually chews through the other's armor, and a few minutes later, we see who had the better gunnery. A few minutes? Dugan asked incredulously. Why does it take so long? 4 lasers, remember? Doesn't even have enough heat sinks to fire them all the time. But the armor means it can just sit there and eventually win the damage race. Dugan's eyebrows shot up. Wait, what did you say? I said it doesn't have enough heat sinks. No, after that. It wins the damage race? Dugan smiled. We circle back to the first idea. Slow and steady wins the race. Carm stared, then groaned. Realizing he just struck out, Dugan reclined back in his chair, head resting on his backward stretched arms, and basked in another job well done. Neither Earthworks nor Johnston nor any other mech manufacturer ever opted to purchase the Great Turtle. Casualties are nothing new in war, but the increasing lethality of weaponry of the 3050s and 60s eventually became apparent to mech warriors across the inner sphere. Gauss rifles, ERPPCs, and large pulse lasers could pluck a pilot's life in the opening salvos of an engagement, making a mech warrior's survival more a matter of luck than skill. Ever one to marry statistical analysis with mech design, Vining Engineering and Salvage Team took the data and turned a problem into a solution. The problem was mech warriors dying more often on the modern battlefield, and if more lethal weapons were the cause, then the solution was better pilot protection. In 3067, the solution to survivability gained a name: the Great Turtle. Like many of Vest's designs, the Great Turtle was an experiment in mech warrior preservation that started with the quad mech chassis. 4 legs meant that the chassis was generally less likely to fall, and if the pilot did lose control, the fall would be shorter and therefore less deadly. It was also the sturdiest chassis design known, allowing for more armor to be allocated than any other battle mech then known to man. Vest used experimental hardened armor to burden the Great Turtle with 40.5 tons of protection, more than twice the tonnage of armor found on the Atlas. While this also doubled the cockpit protection, Vest took pilot safety a step further by removing the pilot from the mech's head and putting it safely within the mech's center torso thanks to a torso-mounted cockpit. Not only would the opposition have to chew through more than 2 Atlases worth of armor to deal critical component damage, but it was essentially impossible to kill the pilot with a lucky shot. The GTR-1 also mounted a standard VLAR 300 engine, so only penetrating the thickest armor could damage it, and the compact gyro further made it harder for the Great Turtle to suffer a catastrophic gyroscope failure. However, there has long been a formula in mechanized warfare that calls for balance in speed, protection, and firepower. Improving one often came at the expense of the other 2. Such was the case with the Great Turtle, where the design sacrificed both speed and firepower for its impressive defenses. Despite having the same engine and overall mass as the Atlas, the Great Turtle was 10 kilometers per hour slower than the iconic assault mech. It also possessed far fewer and less powerful weapon systems than the Atlas, although they were newer. Precision weaponry provided 1 large and 3 medium X pulse lasers to make up the totality of the GTR-1's armament. All 4 weapons were tied to a targeting computer, making the Great Turtle an extremely reliable weapons platform, if not a particularly impressive one. 3 jump jets ensured that the Great Turtle could remain pointed at its foes, and 14 double heat sinks kept the design relatively cool, although repeated alpha strikes would cause overheating problems. There initially seemed to be great interest in the Great Turtle after the Mech's test pilot Kevin Sir Crimson Bryn McFadden of Bromley Stables won 3 Solaris matches in a row, the final one even defeating a previous Vest design. However, the fights were not particularly exciting. McFadden would simply trundle into the open, volley fire his array of X-pulse lasers into the enemy while ignoring all incoming damage, and eventually score a lucky hit that disabled his opponent. When interest seemed to falter, Vest attempted to solve the GTR-1's heat issues with the GTR-2. This removed the X-pulse lasers in favor of an ER-PPC fitted with a capacitor, alongside 3 ER medium lasers. The design carried 3 additional double heat sinks, allowing it to fire all of its weapons repeatedly without any risk of heat-induced shutdown. Unfortunately, the GTR-2 also failed to secure financial investment either from Solaris Stables or larger military manufacturers. There were few Solaris broadcasters interested in the sort of immobile slugfest that fights against the Great Turtle tended toward, and few commanders were interested in a platform that seemed only capable of last-stand defensive actions. Although certainly not Vest's lowest point, that would come during the Jihad as it did for so many boutique mech designers. The Great Turtle was also hardly a success story. Only a single example of both the GTR-1 and GTR-2 was ever produced, and both were presumed lost during the Word of Blake's occupation of the game world. Since then, pilot protection has been a subject that waxes and wanes within military design bureaus. Ideas championed by the Great Turtle, such as hardened armor or torso-mounted cockpit, can be found on modern designs such as the Liren Gutodamarung or the Sea Fox Hammerhead, but rarely are these concepts found together. As the Great Turtle proved, relying entirely on defense isn't always a winning strategy.